During the Soviet era, when academic science was shackled by party dogmas and myths about the greatness of Russian culture served as state ideology, a man from Almaty emerged who managed to bring the entire Russian historiography to its knees. And yet they say that one man can't make a difference. He accomplished what neither academicians, nor Western researchers, nor Soviet dissidents had managed to do. Without making any grand statements, this man single-handedly called into question the entire system of Russian historiography. His courage exposed the lies upon which Russia's cultural identity had been built for decades, if not centuries. Soviet academicians never saw it coming. This man did what seemed impossible. He shattered the Catherine Karamzin Soviet version of history. In that version, Muscovy, having stolen the name Rus, appears as an exclusively Slavic land, claiming the purity of its roots and independence from the influence of other cultures, especially Turkic peoples. The long-standing myths that for centuries continuously fueled the idea of Russian culture as something inherently Slavic, unique, and entirely untouchable were completely and utterly shattered. Russian Soviet historiography began to fall apart at the seams, forcing academics and officials to frantically look for ways to save face. And of course, the harassment began, along with attempts to silence the person who dared to encroach on the sacred. But how did he manage to do what even the most influential minds didn't dare attempt? This is the story of how knowledge becomes a powerful weapon against a hated and brutal empire. So, what is the name of this person? And how exactly did he bring official Russian historiography to its knees? You're about to find out everything. Stay tuned. But first, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notifications about new videos. Please do not forget to hit the like button and leave your comments below, as this helps to promote the video. And if you want to support the author, visit Patreon and buy me a coffee. All links are in the description and first comment. So let's get acquainted. Alta Suleymanov. Born in Almaty in 1936, he became one of the most prominent figures of the Soviet and post-Soviet cultural scene. Poet, writer, scholar, researcher, and activist. Suleymanov? He embodied the traits of a true intellectual leader of the Kazakhs. It was he who, back in 1975, published the resonant book As I Ya, which became a challenge not only to academic science, but also to the ideological system of the Soviet Union. The book As an I touched on the most painful chords of Soviet historiography. In it, Olga Suleymanova meticulously examines historical narratives through the lens of Turkic and Slavic interactions, uncovering and highlighting numerous linguistic borrowings and cultural connections that official scholarship has historically preferred to overlook or ignore. He demonstrated extensively that the roots of the so-called pure Russian culture are actually profoundly and intricately interwoven with Turkic elements, and that numerous distinct characteristics considered to be originally Russian or Slavic are in fact the result of centuries of complex socio-cultural exchange and interaction. Not with the Slavic peoples, but with the Turkic peoples. But how exactly did Suleymanov do this? Here's how. In his book, he dissected the main monument of old Russian literature down to its very core and came to a conclusion that was disappointing for official Russian history. The tale of Igor's campaign, that's what we're talking about. It is not a monolithic, purely Slavic epic, but a multi-layered text with enormous Turkic influences. To put it more simply, the tale was written not in Old Russian, but in a highly unusual and complex Turkic-Slavic linguistic blend. Suleymanov successfully demonstrated that Muscovy, which deliberately appropriated the name Rus, was never the singularly unique and purely Slavic state that traditional Russian historians tried to portray it as. In actual historical reality, Muscovy was compelled to ensure its own survival by borrowing and through extensive cultural exchange with its neighbors, most notably and significantly the Turkic peoples, from whom it absorbed many key elements of its unique culture. This truth dealt a crushing blow to the myth of Muscovy's Slavic purity and uniqueness, a myth that had been preached for decades as the foundation of its identity. So, what exactly are we talking about? Wrote Suleimanov in his book. What exactly made Soviet academics and party ideologists so angry? The thing is, he started to analyze the tale of Igor's campaign, but not in the way everyone before him had done. Where academics saw a heroic epic about Slavic unity, Suleimanov saw a blend of cultures, languages, and borrowings. He approached the text from the perspective of a Turkologist and immediately uncovered a ton of interesting nuances that Slavic scholars prefer to ignore. Let's start with probably the funniest example from the text. Darish cash and a whole bunch of chickens. For many years, this phrase was a real puzzle for translators. Some observers tried to interpret the chickens as actual chickens, while others came up with various metaphors. But the whole situation turned out to be much simpler, and significantly more prosaic. Chickens in this specific context are not birds, but rather structural walls. Among the Turks, the word kura meant fortification, wall. The construction of this word is transparent from the word kur, meaning build, erect. That's it. No chickens, just city walls. But for Russian historiography, admitting that a Turkic term ended up at the heart of the old Russian epic was like swallowing a bitter pill. Or, for example, Dibri Kasajun. Russian researchers racked their brains trying to figure out where these places were. These mysterious debris and what Kisan means. There were suggestions like Avrar Kisani, Debris Kisani, and interpretations were offered from the Serbian lexicon. Suleimanov, however, claimed that this is how the author referred to iron shackles, Tamir Kisan. He relied on a variety of dialectal names for iron. Temur, Temur, Timur, Temur, Tamir, Tebur, Demir, Timur, Timer, and so on. No mystical forest, just ordinary shackles, which, by the way, were a common part of life back then. And what about the skinny tool? In the chapter Sviatoslav's Dream, there are these lines. They scatter swords and tules, the filthy and the great council, pearls on the neck and darkness of pleasure. Ah, those skinny tules, which, according to Soviet translators, were worn-out quivers, symbolizing decline and defeat. But if you look at it from the Turkic perspective, everything becomes clear. In Turkic languages, tula means widow. The skinny tules are not quivers at all, but rather thin widows mourning the fallen warriors. It's about tragedy, sorrow, not some pitiful quivers. The full phrase was translated by Suleimanov, like this. The skinny widows of the filthy pagans shower me with large pearls on my chest and caress me. According to Suleimanov's translation, the line is full of Turkicisms. Talkovin, Kalkpagan, Zhenshug, Kipchak rendering of the Chinese Yenchu. The bird Garazda, which deeply perplexed many translators of various historical eras, who rendered it as an exceptionally swift and rapid bird, thanks to Suleimanov became Karas, that is, a rooster in Turkic. Just like that, with a single stroke, Suleimanov swept away all the romantic fantasies about Slavic heroes and replaced them with reality, where Turkic words are woven into the narrative, just like the fates of people who lived side by side. And there are dozens of such examples in the text. Suleimanov showed that the text, which for centuries was presented as purely the Slavic epic, in reality, is written in a bizarre mix of Slavic and Turkic languages, a kind of Surgic, if you will. The entire meaning of the work changes when you start to understand these terms correctly. Instead of a monolithic Slavic epic, we are presented with a multi-layered work, filled with cultural intersections and borrowings. It's no wonder the academics were furious. For years, they had been building up the myth of Slavic exceptionalism, and then along comes a Kazakh poet who shows that it's nothing more than a beautiful but empty facade. It's no surprise that the book was met with dead silence, and that every effort was made to erase its traces from the public sphere. But as the saying goes, the truth always comes out in the end. And now, no serious researcher can ignore Suleymanov's contribution, even if they really wish they could. Olja Suleymanov's book, Az-İya, touched the Holy of Holies, the myth of the flawlessness and ancient origins of Russian culture. And that's like a shot to the heart. What do you mean, a Turkic component? Could it really be that the tale of Igor's campaign is not the sacred tablet of the original pure Russian civilization? The Soviet authorities reacted instantly. Confiscate, ban, denounce. The best ways to fight inconvenient truths. Clichés about pan-Turkism and nationalism were thrown around, standard labels for every occasion. The academic circles weren't far behind, jolted by this abrupt awakening. After all, Soviet historians had grown used to basking comfortably in the glow of their own invented righteousness. And now, right under their noses, they're handed something that completely overturns their beliefs, Turkic influences in Slavic texts. To admit this would mean destroying narratives built up over years, and with them, their own professional careers. So, accusations of being anti-Russian and undermining the foundations of Soviet historiography were quick to follow. But no matter how hard the authorities and scholarly minds tried, Suleymanov managed to stay afloat thanks to the intervention of Din Muhammad Kunaya. The first secretary of the Communist Party of Kazakhstan used his connections and reached out to Lenin and Brezhnev. Brezhnev must have just waved it off, not wanting to quarrel with Kunayev. In the end, Suleymanov got off with just a severe reprimand, and the book was simply banned. But the more they tried to hide the book, the more people became interested in its contents. The book, Az-İya, unexpectedly became a catalyst for national awakening in Kazakhstan. What they intended to brand as heresy turned into a symbol of rethinking their own history and cultural heritage. Suleymanov reminded Kazakhs that history is not always a story about the conquered and the oppressed, but a complex interweaving of interactions and influences. And here's the irony. What Russian historians clung to so desperately, they stubbornly tried to keep classified. The so-called secret turned out to be a revelation, changing not only the view of the Kazakh past, but also forcing people to see themselves differently. After the collapse of the USSR, Suleymanov's influence only grew stronger. His ideas began to resonate with new generations of historians, who realized that many elements considered purely Russian culture were actually borrowed and transformed through contact with Turkic peoples. A sobering disappointment for those who, for centuries, insisted on the purity and uniqueness of the Russian world. It turned out that this entire majestic tower of Slavic spirit stands on a foundation of cultural borrowings. Fuzzy? Hardly. But you can't argue with facts, even if they don't fit into convenient fairy tales at all. Although, to be perfectly honest, I don't quite understand what the underlying problem is, with Moscow openly acknowledging the historical fact that it has significantly more in common with the Turks in Asia than with the Slavs in Europe. Although, in fact, that's exactly what Moscow is doing right now. It's restoring forgotten ties with Asia and the global south, turning into a proxy for China. It's just unclear what the Slavs have to do with any of this. And the maniacal desire to seize Kiev, which for some reason they consider their ancient homeland. In the end, the book Az-İya became a powerful tool for deconstructing myths. The irony is that it was Suleymanov who managed to break down the unshakable pillars of Russian historiography, leaving the apologists of a unified and great culture bewildered. Yes, history, as Suleymanov reminded us, is not a dusty museum exhibit, but a living fabric created by the interaction of many peoples. And the more Russian historians desperately hold on to their illusions, the more painfully apparent it becomes. The truth will eventually emerge, sooner or later, whether they like it or not.